Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Andrea, and I work on the marketing team at the Strand. We're very happy to have you here tonight, but before we launch into our discussion with Maria, we'd like to share a bit of the history of the Strand, if you don't know it already. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until 93 years later. The Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass-Wyden. We want to thank you all for your support, because we know without our loyal community of book lovers, we would not be where we are today. Where we are today is actually 1 week reopened after closing for 3 months. So if you are in New York, we'd love to see you at the store. And if not, thank you for the support in any way you've been there for us through all of the quarantine. Tonight, we are excited to have Maria Konnikova, who is celebrating the release of her book, The Biggest Bluff. Maria will be joined tonight by Erik Larson. Maria is the author of Mastermind and The Confidence Game. She is a regular contributing writer to The New Yorker, and has written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, Slate, The Republic, The Paris Review, The Wall Street Journal, Salon, The Boston Globe, Scientific American, Wired, and the Smithsonian, among other publications. Wow. Her writing has won numerous awards, including the 2019 Excellence in Science Journalism Award from the Society of Personality and Social Psychology. While researching The Biggest Bluff, Maria became an international poker champion and the winner of over $300,000 in tournament earnings. Maria also hosts the podcast called The Grift from Panoply Media, and is currently a visiting fellow at NYU's School of Journalism. Her podcast work earned a National Magazine Award nomination in, her podcast work earned a National Magazine Award nomination in 2019. Maria is a graduate of Harvard University and received her PhD in psychology from Columbia. Tonight, Maria will be joined by Erik Larson. Erik is the author of 6 New York Times bestsellers, including Dead Wake, The Last Crossing of the Lusitania, which hit the #1 spot in the New York Times list soon after its launch, and his newest book, The Splendid and the Vile, a saga of Churchill, family, and the defiance during the Blitz. The latter is in large part a domestic drama that examines how Winston Churchill and his secret circle really went about surviving the German air campaign in 1940 and 41. Erik's book, The Devil in the White City, is set to be a Hulu limited series, and his In the Garden of Beasts is under option by Tom Hanks for a feature film. Erik lives in Manhattan with his wife, who is a writer and retired neonatologist, and they have 3 grown daughters. Without further ado, Maria Konnikova and Erik Larson.
Hi, good evening. Hello, Maria. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Erik.
So nice to see you. I haven't seen you before tonight in close to 4 months, but that's what happens in a pandemic. So without further ado, let's jump into the story of The Biggest Bluff and how you actually came about doing this. I'm always intrigued as to how people come up with book ideas. Is something we've talked about innumerable times over liquid lunches in Manhattan and happier times. So when did you first start thinking about this book, and what was the original conception?
I first started thinking about this book maybe 4 years ago, and it had nothing to do with poker at the time. I became fascinated by the idea of luck, the role it plays in our lives, how much of our lives we can control, how much of our lives we can't control, how we can learn to tell the difference between the two. And I went through so many different ideas before landing on poker. I mean, I thought, oh, let me do an American dream immigrant story. I'm going to, follow different people who came here on the same ship, who came through Ellis Island on the same day, and see how different their lives turned out. I mean, there were so...
Good idea.
Good idea. Yes, it's
anyway,
yours.
Go ahead.
You're much better at historical nonfiction than I'll ever be. So you take that one. But nothing felt right. And also my agent who shares this with your agent, is quite a harsh critic and kept saying, no, 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 no. So I kept thinking and trying to figure out what's me, what fits, how do I explore this? Because a theme is not a book. You need a story. You need something meaty. You need something to sink your teeth into.
But what drew you to luck in the first place?
A lot of things went wrong at the same time. And don't get me wrong, I have always considered myself incredibly lucky, and I still do. But sometimes you have moments in your life where nothing seems to go right. And there was a period in time where that's exactly what happened. I got sick, some sort of weird autoimmune thing. My body just became allergic to everything. I'd break out in hives. Everything was painful. Oftentimes I couldn't go outside. It was quite a change to my usual healthy self, because normally I'm quite healthy. I'm very, very lucky that I am. So that happened. And as I was dealing with this, my grandmother died suddenly. She was healthy, nothing had been wrong, and she just slipped and hit her head. And that was that. And no one, she wasn't my first grandparent to die. And with all the others, we had a chance to say goodbye. It was kind of this gradual process. And this was just sheer luck, bad luck, an accident. And I'd also, and when she died, I was thinking about her life. I mean, I was born in Russia when it was still the Soviet Union. I was born in Moscow. And she had lived in the Soviet Union and had gone through so many dictatorships. I mean, she'd survived so much to come here and prosper, and then one fine day, no longer there. So a lot of things like that were just happening at the same time. And it really made me realize we think we have agency, we think we're in control, and we are to a certain extent. We make our choices, we make decisions, we can think through things, but then there's just chance. There's this stuff that can happen no matter how good we are.
I want to talk to you about that in a little bit, like what the nature of luck, the meaning of luck, and so forth. But first, I want to get back to how eventually then you evolved, your idea evolved so that you took on the role of international poker femme fatale.
So I started reading a lot about luck. Whenever I'm taking on any new project, that's what I do. I just read, and see if something clicks, see what's out there, see what's been written. And someone suggested, hey, if you're interested in chance, you should really be reading about game theory. Game theory is a really good way of looking at it and of building a framework to deal with chance. And so I decided to check out The Theory of Games, which is the foundational text of game theory. I'd never read it before. I don't really recommend it. It's pretty dry. I didn't understand most of it. But what I did understand was that John von Neumann, who is one of the authors, was not only a poker player, but that poker player was actually the foundation of game theory, that it was the inspiration for game theory. That von Neumann, and I knew about von Neumann before. He is one of the great polymaths of the 20th century. I mean, the thing we're sitting in front of right now, the computer, he's the inventor of that. And the hydrogen bomb, which hopefully none of us have ever experienced. He also was involved in that. He worked on the Manhattan Project. I mean, this guy was brilliant, and he was the creator of game theory. And he was obsessed with poker. He said that in poker, he had found the perfect metaphor for life, the perfect way of looking at human decision-making, that poker really mirrored the way decisions were made in life. It was a game of incomplete information, under uncertainty. So there were knowns, but there were also things that you didn't know. And then you also had to figure out, it was a game of people. You had to figure out, well, what do you know? What do you think I know that you know? What do I think you know that I know that you know? I mean, you can just go back and forth and back and forth. And he thought that if you solved that, if you figured out a way to approach that, then you'd really have the answer to the questions that I was posing, where skill ends, where chance begins. And it really intrigued me. And I thought, what is this poker thing? I mean, I'm not a games player. I didn't care about poker at all. To me,
had you ever played before you?
No, never. I knew nothing about poker. The only time I'd ever seen a poker game was in the movie Rounders. That was that was the only time that poker had crossed my path. And I thought Matt Damon was pretty good. That was kind of my impression of poker as an actor, not as a poker player. I didn't know how he was as a poker player. And I thought John Malkovich's Russian accent was really funny and really bad. He did a good Teddy KGB.
And you would know because you're fluent in Russian. So John von Neumann was sort of the first spark that made you think about poker?
Yes, absolutely. If it weren't for John von Neumann, I never would have thought about poker. It literally came from that book. I read this and I thought, if this brilliant dude thought that poker was the key to everything, I should Google poker. So I did, and I didn't have any books at home about poker. So I did a search and I started reading a little bit about it and I thought, this is really interesting. So I read a little more and I thought, wait, what if I learn poker? What if I actually use this game and the process of learning this game as a way of exploring all of these issues? Could that work? And I went to my agent and she said, yes, that could work. This sounds good. And so that was the beginning of my journey in the poker world.
So you got into this idea of learning poker, getting into this poker world. How many days were you into it before you said to yourself, what am I doing? Or did that happen?
I mean, that happened multiple times. Sometimes, it's happening to this day. Sometimes I just turn around and think, wait, what? This is not me. And honestly, if someone had stopped me in the street 5 years ago and said, hey, Maria, do you know that not only are you going to do this thing, but you're going to at some point become a professional poker player for a while, I would have said, that's such a funny joke, because it's not something that I could have ever imagined, not something I could have ever planned for. And there were multiple times when I thought, what am I doing here? And some of them happened when I actually entered the world, and eventually I moved to a level where it was wonderful and all the people were great and everyone was smart and everyone was there for the right reasons. But at the lower levels, that was absolutely not the case. And I would sometimes find myself in these horrible situations where I thought, why am I here? And then I would say, wait, you're a writer. That's why you're here. So this might feel horrible. You might really not enjoy what's happening right now. But as Nora Ephron said, everything is copy. This is going to be a good story. I had to channel a lot of Nora Ephron during this process.
The worse the time, the better the story. You talk about another researcher who I was very intrigued by, who seemed to influence you also, Michael Slepian. Am I pronouncing his name correctly? And his insights into our ability or lack thereof to keep a secret. I found that a fascinating line of inquiry. Tell us about that.
Yeah, he is a researcher whose work I came across as I was immersing myself in this world. He's now at Columbia University, and he studied a lot of secret keeping. So how do people keep secrets, or how do they let secrets seep out? And psychologists are constantly looking for ways to set up studies. How do I study this? And Slepian had a brilliant insight. He said, wait, I don't need to create anything fake. I need to look at poker players. Poker players are keeping secrets all the time. They're bluffing. Poker players misrepresent their hand, and that's a secret, and they know something that you don't know, and they're representing something that isn't true. So why don't we study poker players? And he set up a really interesting study where he took videos from the World Series of Poker. And for people who, like me, before this project know nothing about poker, this is the largest event in the poker world that happens once a year. So he took videos of players at the table that had been aired on TV. He edited out their hands so that you couldn't actually see, by their hands, I mean their cards. So you couldn't actually see what cards they had. And he had lots of people watch these videos, and he asked them a question. Is this person strong? Do they have a good hand or not? And most of these people didn't know anything about poker. And he showed 3 versions of the video. In one, it was totally unaltered. So normally when you see a poker video, you see the poker table and then you see everyone waist up. And so they saw that. In another video, they just saw shoulders up, so just the faces. And in another video, they saw actually just below the shoulders down, so just the arms and the hands. What we know from research on deception is that people are really, really bad at spotting deception, really bad at telling when people are keeping secrets, when they're lying. and were really no better than a coin flip, 50-50 to be either right or wrong. And he found that when people saw the whole video, that's exactly what happened. They were just a coin flip. They didn't really know if someone had a strong hand or not. When they just looked at the face, they actually got worse. So it ends up that the eyes are definitely not the window to the soul, and poker faces are pretty good. So people were looking at all the wrong things, because it ends up that we actually, when we're looking at a face, we look at a lot of subconscious cues. So what do your eyebrows look like? What's the shape of your jaw? All of these things are conveying subconscious information, like, is this person trustworthy? Is this person aggressive? We have no conscious access to the fact that we're doing this, but there's actually research from Princeton University, separate from Slepian's work, that shows that within microseconds, we make these sorts of judgments about people. So it ends up that when people were looking at faces, that's what they did, and they became worse than chance because they were looking at totally the wrong cues. But when people just looked at the hands and the arms, something really cool happened. They became really good at telling if someone was strong or not.
You're talking about the physical human hands,
The
not
physical hands, not the actual,
yes.
not the cards. Yes. So how people handled the cards, how they handled the chips, how they bet, what they were doing with their hands was conveying all of this information. And that was totally fascinating to me, but it also makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of practice at controlling our faces. You're always having to control your face. You're paying attention to your face. You know that people are looking at your face. You know, if someone cooks you a nice meal and you have a first bite and it's really, really gross, and this isn't someone who you know very well, you're going to have your face go in a smile and not in a face of utter disgust, right? You don't want to ruin this interaction. So we're pretty good at hiding information when it comes to our faces, but our hands, we don't really pay attention to. I mean, you guys are watching this video. I don't know how many times my hands have come up just because I talk with my hands and it's really hard for me not to do that. But also we have a pulse, and you can see the pulse in the hands. We sweat, and you can see sweat and skin conductance in the hands. So there are a lot of things that are outside of our control that happen in the hands, but also we're just not good at paying attention to them. We don't standardize our gestures. We don't standardize our motions. We're not thinking that our hands are revealing information, and so we don't pay attention to how they might be revealing information.
So we're saying hands are the window of the soul.
Hands are the window into the soul. So next time you cook a meal for someone and they smile and say, "This is delicious," start looking at their hands and see what story their hands are saying.
So all this research you did a lot of research into the nature of luck, the science of luck, as well as, of course, learning the fine arts of poker and so forth. Did you ever find that the research that you were doing, you know, the von Neumann research, the Slepian research, other hardcore things that you read about and learned about, did you find that all of that began to inform your game, that it helped, or did it just hinder? I mean, I don't know. You know,
No, I actually think it helped a lot. I mean, things like the Slepian research were revelatory in the sense that I started picking up a lot more information, because it's hard. When you're playing poker, there are lots of other people at the table and they're doing a lot of things. There's a lot of information, and it's really hard to cut through the noise and figure out what's the signal. What am I supposed to be paying attention to? And at the beginning, I was paying attention to all sorts of incorrect things. And so I'd make bad reads about people. But knowing the Slepian work helped me focus my attention on different body parts and how people were acting. And then I layered that onto some of the other mistakes that I learned I'd been making to help me be better. And understanding game theory, understanding how people thought, that also helped me both understand other people's decisions, but also to spot my own biases, my own mistakes, the way that my own logic was flawed. Like when I saw someone sit down at the table, this actually kind of combines the two. And this actually happened. This guy sat at the table and he had on a tank top and he had just these huge muscles, like just bulging muscles and tattoos. And I thought, this guy's going to be so aggressive. I'm not going to let him bully me. I know what a bully this is. And it ends up he was actually an incredibly conservative type player who didn't bully anyone and didn't play very many hands at all. But I didn't know this. So I actually made some huge mistakes because I was going on the complete wrong information and not what I should have been paying attention to.
So now you had a guide into this world, your mentor, Erik Seidel. How important was that to have? Explain first of all who he is, and also how important that was for you to A, to gain entree to this world, and B, to improve your game.
Erik Seidel is considered by many people to be the greatest player of all time. And even people who say, well, maybe not the greatest, will concede that he's one of the greatest. I'm biased, so I think he's the greatest of all time, but I acknowledge my biases. But he is, so going back to Rounders, that movie that introduced me to poker for the first time, he was the guy in the visor who came in second in the 1988 World Series of Poker main event to Johnny Chan, and the Matt Damon character keeps watching this video over and over and over. And that was the start of Erik's career. 1988. Most people do not last that long in poker. It's a game that favors the young because it requires a lot of physical endurance. And it's a game that oftentimes people will just flare out because it changes, it evolves, the strategy changes. And Erik is unique because he started in the 80s and he's remained at the very, very top of the game until today. So he's still winning events at the highest level. And that's just, no one else has done that. And that was one of the reasons that I asked him to mentor me. But he ended up being much more important than I could have ever thought because I didn't know who he was. I'd never met him. I didn't know what kind of a person he was. And he ended up being kind of this Yoda character who just is quiet, is humble, and just keeps emitting these pearls of wisdom. His whole approach was about thinking, about how to think correctly. He didn't ever really teach me poker strategy. He taught me the strategy of approaching the game, of approaching decision-making. And I think the book would have been very, very different had I just had a great poker player, but one who just focused on the strategy of poker. This is how you play this hand. So I think at the end of the day, Erik's approach was much better for me because I didn't really care as much about poker as I did about the process, about the decision-making, about what poker could teach me.
So wait, are you saying it was lucky that you came across Erik Seidel?
I am saying it was lucky that I came across Erik Seidel. Now, he was my first choice. I approached him, but it was very lucky that he was my first choice.
So now, with regard to Erik Seidel, you refer at some point in your book to your dragonfly theory. Explain that to the audience, because I found that fascinating. Explain, first of all, the nature of the dragonfly as a predator.
The dragonfly is the single most effective predator in the animal kingdom. This is a fact that I was shocked by when I came across it, because I was trying to figure out actually what would be a good metaphor for Erik. And I started looking into, as one does, predators and what predatorial success rate was. And it ends up that all of the predators that you think of as successful, you know, the lions, the tigers, the wolves, they're actually pretty bad. They don't capture that much of their prey. And the dragonfly, I'm going to get the exact percentage wrong, but dragonflies capture over 90% of their prey. And the reason they're able to do that is because they've evolved not just to spot motion, which is what most predators do, but to anticipate motion. So they have so many sensory receptors that they know what their prey is going to do before their prey does it. And so they're able to anticipate that and catch them when they move, which is kind of terrifying, but also also very inspiring. I mean, I want to be that dragonfly. I want to know what everyone's going to do right before they do it. And when I read that, it really resonated with what Erik was able to achieve at the poker table. He was someone who almost knew what his opponents were going to do better than they did, and who could adjust to basically anyone and play in any style and would become a totally different insect depending on which prey he was chasing. And so I decided that dragonfly was going to be the best nickname for him. And I called that style of approach the dragonfly effect. And I hope it sticks because I think it's a really cool term.
I thought it was very revelatory. I thought it was good. So in the course of this book, poker, it strikes me that learning to play poker was just like almost, I don't want to say a byproduct, but it's really not at all what this book is about. And one of the things that I was so impressed with was that when you started to play, you actually entered a whole new world with characters who in that world are dominant characters, are well known, are honored and revered, and the rest of us have no idea who they are. So along those lines, tell me about Chewy.
Oh, you picked one of my favorites. I came across a poker player whose nickname is Lucky Chewy, or Chewy for short. His real name is Andrew Lichtenberger. The first time I saw him, I thought that it was because...
Where does Chewy come from? Chewbacca, is that?
Well, that's what I was about to say.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Stepped on your line.
Well, the first time I saw him, I thought, oh my God, your nickname is perfect because you look like Chewbacca. He had long reddish hair that was below his shoulders. He had this huge bushy red beard that was just all over it. And I just looked at him and I thought, oh, I understand why you're Chewy. And because I'm a journalist, I'm allowed to ask, are you named Chewy after Chewbacca? And it's not totally out of line because I can say I'm writing a book. I need this information for background. It ends up that no, he was not in fact named after Chewbacca. He was named after Chewy bars that he would have with him at the table. And he kept winning tournament after tournament. So Lucky Chewy bars, which was sad. So in my heart, he's still Chewbacca. But Chewy is an incredibly successful poker player, but he's also just this, the reason he's successful isn't necessarily why other players are successful. He is the epitome of Zen. I have never seen someone with as much meditative presence at the poker table as Chewy has. And he actually wrote a little book called The Yoga of Poker. And when I asked him, after observing how closely he was paying attention, how he seemed to just resonate with everything that was going on at the table, even when he was not involved in the hand, I came up to him and I said, hey, can we talk? I'd love to sit down and find out about this. And the way he explained the game, it was all about flow and energy and how he could just sense the energy transfers between players and how to him it was just this positive, energetic thing. And I thought, wow, poker seems to be a pretty zero-sum game. You know, I take your money or you take my money. The fact that you experience this as a more Zen-like metaphor really tells me something about your mind and about the potential of the game. I learned a lot about poker from Chewy and from that approach. It's hard. It's hard to pay attention. It's incredibly difficult to be so mindfully present. How often do you find yourself reaching for your phone or reaching for this or reaching for that? It's really difficult to just constantly be aware of other people and be in tune with them and be paying attention to what they're doing. It's a talent.
Am I remembering this correctly? Didn't you later in the book encounter Chewy again, and he had crew cut and shaved his beard? I mean,
yes, this is correct. I encountered him a little over a year later, and he was no longer Chewbacca-like. He had gone completely clean cut, and I'd encountered him after he'd taken a break from poker because he found himself on the wrong side of variance. So that means his results started going downhill and he wanted to rebalance the energy, which he did.
Yeah. Okay, so now I have to stop you there and let's talk about variance because that's crucial, right? Talk about what variance is and how that relates to what we lay folk refer to as luck.
Variance is just the distribution of outcomes that's possible. So if you kind of draw a curve of where you could be, the variance is all the noise. That the real world is not a normal distribution. It's not like a bell curve. You could be on one end and be running very well and all of a sudden have all these lucky things happen to you. Or you can be on the other end and be running very poorly and have all these bad things happening to you. It has nothing to do with the quality of your decisions. Every person has a mean, so we'll all eventually regress to the mean, which means the variance over the long term evens out. And that's where your skill level actually comes out. So the mean is how skilled you are, how good you are, how good the quality of your decisions is. But that doesn't necessarily translate to a good outcome always. So if you're making the right decision, you're never 100% to get the outcome that you're going for, because the world is uncertain and there's chance, there's noise, there's variance, stuff can happen. And so you can make the best decision possible with the information you have, and you should make that decision over and over every time. But you might find yourself over and over in this particular case on the bad side of variance. So say you know that you, in poker terms, get your money in good. Let's say you're a 75% favorite. So you're 75% to win. 25% is a lot. 25% is going to happen quite a lot of time. And you might find yourself, when you're running badly, when the variance is against you, you might find yourself in that 25% over and over and over. That doesn't mean you suddenly became worse. It doesn't mean your decisions deteriorated. It just means that right now, chance isn't on your side, because chance, and this is a very important lesson and one that poker really hammered home to me, chance has no memory. It doesn't care about you. It's not like...
I have to read this line. I was going to ask you about that, because I love this. I love this sentence. You say, probability has amnesia. And each future outcome is completely independent of the past. And what I wanted to ask you about is, how did this realization, how does that realization affect your thinking about everyday life? I mean, when I read this, one of the first things I thought about is like this delusion that I have about flying in an airplane. Like, if there's been an air crash and I fly on an airplane, because I hate to fly, as you know, that I feel much better if there's been an air crash before, because I know it's not going to happen again. But obviously what this tells you is, no, not so. Not so. They're completely independent events. I mean, how did that change your perspective on life, or did it?
It did. It did. In some ways, at first it can be a little bit depressing, but then it's actually profoundly liberating, because you realize that focusing on those things is just a waste of emotional energy, because you can't affect it. It has amnesia. It doesn't care about what happens, and it doesn't care about you. Probability doesn't care about what you did or didn't do. It doesn't care that you really can't die on this flight. This plane really can't crash because you have a really important event to get to and you're going to change the world at this event. Doesn't matter.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, but in a way, it's quite liberating, because you realize that you just need to focus your energy on the things that are controllable, on the things that you actually can affect, because you can. There are so many things that we can change that are dependent on how we act, that are dependent on our emotional state, on how we frame things. I mean, even bad variance, right? When bad things happen, the way we respond to them, the way we react emotionally, the way that we tell that story, because it's all storytelling when you think about framing and how you think about things. The way we tell that story to ourselves, the way we tell that to other people, it's going to affect how we process the event. It's going to affect how resilient we are. It's going to affect how well we do on the other end, and how prepared we are to just move on and be ready for when variance is going to be on our side again, when she goes our way.
And you mentioned a very interesting line of research about how what sort of behaviors seem to define lucky people and unlucky people, like finding a $5 bill, or what was it, $5 bill, $20 bill in the bar. I mean,
I don't remember what amount of money it was, but finding money. And one of the things that, yes, these are a lot of really interesting studies that a psychologist named Richard Wiseman did in the UK. And he did things like leave money, and also have people go through newspapers and count photographs. And he divided people, when they signed up for the studies, into self-described lucky individuals and unlucky individuals. So he would ask people, do you think of yourself as lucky generally or unlucky? And he found that the lucky people were actually luckier in the sense that they spotted the money, and they also completed the picture searching study much faster, because it ends up that on page 2 of the newspaper, it said, stop counting. There are however many pictures in this newspaper. And so what he realized was that people who thought of themselves as lucky actually paid attention to the world in a different way. They kind of looked at the whole, they looked at the gestalt, they looked at what was going on, and they were open to a lot of different stimuli. Whereas the people who thought of themselves as unlucky were much more myopic. They were really focused on what they were supposed to be doing. And so they didn't even realize when you put something very lucky in front of them. They didn't even see it. There's a famous quote that almost everyone quotes about luck, which I include in the book. It's from Louis Pasteur, and it says, "Chance favors the prepared mind." But the full quote isn't that. People don't realize that that's actually the second part of the sentence. The full quote is, when it comes to observation, chance favors the prepared mind. Such a crucial difference.
Yeah, very, very. So let's return to your journey. Okay, I know you to be an intensely thorough reporter. The journey for this book took you literally around the world to far-flung locales for weeks at a time. I was curious, how kind of toll that takes on a writer. And I was curious, what was the high point of that whole journey, and what was the low point? What was the lowest point?
Yeah, the low point is actually easier to think of than the high point, because you realize at some point that even though as writers we travel all the time, we don't travel like that. In 2018, I spent, when I counted it up and did the math, I was on the road for about 8 months out of the year in total. That is insane. I mean, it takes a toll on you. And I think the low point for me was Macau. When I found myself,
yes.
First of all, I mean, when you come to Macau, you travel through so many time zones and it takes so long. And I think I was there for 2 weeks, and I never got over that jet lag. I was waking up in the middle of the night and not able to sleep the entire time I was there. And Macau is a terrible place. I hate Macau. Macau is just it's everything I hate about the world in which I found myself, and nothing I came to love. It was just all of the gambling and the vice, and there was nothing else. There was nothing to sugarcoat it. It was just that dark side of humanity, the dark side of poker players, because a lot of the best poker players but the ones who aren't necessarily as good as humans, but really out there to take advantage of people, but who are very good at poker, came to Macau to be sharks and to feed on people who couldn't help themselves, who were gambling. And so it was quite depressing. And I remember walking through Macau, walking through this place that has this very dystopian name, the City of Dreams. And I was walking through the City of Dreams and seeing I'm on the casino floor, and people are screaming because they're playing baccarat. And if you don't scream loudly enough, the cards aren't going to change to be the cards that you need them to be. There are all these superstitions and everything going around. And I realized that some of the people had been sitting there for days and had not gotten up, had not changed their clothes, and all of these things. And I just thought, where am I? How did I get here? For the book, once again, everything, the worse the experience, the better the material. I'm so glad I did that, but that was definitely the low point. And I thought, I never want to go back to Macau.
Didn't you maybe you want to save this for readers for the book, but didn't you at one point end up lying in a fetal position on the floor of a ladies' room?
Yes, this also happened.
Just thought I'd remind you of that.
That too happened. I still think Macau was the low point emotionally of the journey, because the fetal position happened much earlier on. It was the main event of the World Series of Poker, and I was really excited. I was going to be playing this huge event, and I got a migraine because chance, because you can't control everything. And the funny thing is, I had just done everything right. I'd gotten a lot of sleep. I'd eaten well, I was well rested, all of these things. I did everything that I know how to do to control my migraines, because I've had them my whole life. And it didn't matter. And yes, I found myself on the floor. of the Rio Hotel and Casino, which is not the nicest property in Las Vegas, throwing up over a toilet for a little bit over an hour. And I'm still alive to tell the tale. The Rio is also not known for its hygiene standards. But to be perfectly honest, even the best place in the world, you don't want to be on the floor of the bathroom, of a public bathroom, in fetal position. That's going to strain any immune system. That was a low point, indeed.
That's good. I was like, so glad that was not a high point. So you also on this journey, you had to learn an awful lot of jargon. Things like the river and what a bad beat is, and grinder and all this stuff. And first of all, did you find it this at all daunting to learn this stuff? And also, to what extent was it necessary to know all this, to learn this, to make your way into the world, to make your way into this game?
I found it incredibly daunting. At the beginning, it was just information overload because I didn't know any of these terms at all. I mean, it was all new to me. And so imagine learning a foreign language and you're actually doing a language immersion program, and think about your first weeks there where you don't understand what's going on. It's really hard to figure out what way is up. You're just getting the sense of the verbs and how those work. But there are all these terms, and some of them are cognates, but a lot of them don't actually mean what you think they mean because they're false cognates, and you have to just sort through all of this in your mind. And it was very daunting. But I do think that it was important to learn to speak the language, because poker players started speaking to me differently. They started treating me differently and relating to me in a different way when it became clear that I actually was grasping what a lot of these terms meant, that I wasn't just throwing them around, because I didn't throw them around before I understood them. As a writer, I'm someone who's very conscious of only using words that I actually understand. And if I don't get it, I will ask before I ever use it.
So you could talk the walk.
Exactly.
Walk the talk. So we're actually getting some questions from the audience. I guess it's the time to turn that way. Let me see. Let me take a look at some of these. Oh, this is a very good question. I was actually going to start out with this, but I decided not to. How is your book tour now? How is it different from, I guess, your other book tours? I think what this person is getting at is, what's it like to launch a book during a pandemic?
It's not at all what I could have imagined. And I've never had a virtual book tour before. I mean, right now, this event would have been in person. You and I would have been sitting at the Strand in front of people in their rare books room, which is beautiful. I love that room. And we would have been having an in-person conversation. And what's more, next week, I would have been off to Las Vegas, because right now is supposed to be the World Series of Poker. And the main event was next week. And my book launch was actually purposefully scheduled to be in the middle of the World Series so that we could take advantage of that and help promote the book in Las Vegas and do some fun events. And the funny thing is, though, this is what the book is about, that you can plan, you can make the best decision possible, you can plan for all the eventualities, and yet variance. Chance happens, events that you couldn't have predicted, things that are on the outlier part of the graph, they're going to happen, and that's not in your control, and you have to adjust. So here we are, and I'm so glad that we are adjusting.
I was wondering if that would be somehow working into your thinking about luck, the whole COVID pandemic, and anyway. All right, so another question: can you? This person asks, do you think you can monetize this skill full time? Like, can you make a living at this, do you think? Is this something you could do?
Could I monetize poker full time? Yes, I think I can, but I don't want to. I find poker fascinating. I think it has taught me a lot. I think it has made me a much stronger person. But at the end of the day, I love the game and it challenges me, and I'm going to keep playing. but what feeds my soul and what makes me who I am is writing. It's something that's always been true for me, and something that, you know, from as long as I can remember, I've wanted to write. And whenever I've stopped, and I have stopped for periods of time, I felt like there was a part of me missing. And I was forced to go back to writing because I couldn't not, because I missed it so much. And so that's always going to be what I do. Now, the two, it's not incompatible with poker, but I think part of my enjoyment of poker, part of the reason that I'm able to succeed is that it's not the only thing I do, is that it's part of other things. I think if I found myself in a situation where I realized, wow, this is what I have to do, I think I would start hating it at some point. So I think that it would never work for me because of who I am to be a full-time poker player.
Another question from the audience. Have you found that there is something in leaving things to chance? Is there,
No.
On to the next question.
No, I think that
I think I know what this person is asking. Like, you know, how often do you hear somebody say, well, if it's meant to be, it'll happen? How do you feel about that when somebody says?
I think that's a really bad attitude.
Yeah.
I think you have to do everything possible to try to make it happen, because I think that what poker teaches you, what I've learned from this journey, is there are so many things over which we don't have agency, that we don't have control over, that we damn well better capitalize on the things that we do control. I mean, take advantage of it. Claim your agency. That's why I hate superstitions, because superstitions give away your agency. They're putting things that you can control onto some random object or some random ritual. You're giving up control by imbuing something else with it and giving away something that you can actually do. And to me, that's just crazy.
Yeah, I always laugh when one of my kids will, you know, maybe I'll be talking about the weather on a day when we're all going to be, you know, out at the beach or something, and I'll say, oh, I think it's going to be fabulous weather, and one of my kids will inevitably say, Dad, don't jinx it. And then my response always is, listen, if I had that kind of power, there are so many other things I would do with it, believe me.
Absolutely. And isn't it liberating to know that really you can't jinx it? Because it doesn't care about you. It has amnesia.
Exactly. So here's another question. Oh, this is nice. You are so interesting. I assume it's directed at you. You are so interesting. Do you have any?
You are so interesting.
Do you have any ideas of what your next journey or project will be?
No, I am incapable of figuring out what my next book or what my next project is going to be until I'm done with the one I'm working on. I want to give this all of my energy and all of my brain power, and I don't like half-assing anything. So right now I'm just focused on the book launch, focused on this, and then I'll have some brain space and I'll figure out what's next, but take it one day at a time.
Oh, amen to that. So, okay. All right, so next question. Let's see, how do you think you can start approaching opportunities with a lucky mind?
Well, I think it's not necessarily saying I have a lucky mind. It's what we were talking about earlier, kind of the power of presence, the power of observation, the power of taking control and claiming agency over your own actions, your emotions, your reactions. Because a lot of people, you know, they'll see the world as happening to them as opposed to them doing things in the world. And I think that that's not a great way of thinking. When you start seeing events as happening to you, that takes away, once again, that takes away your agency. And what we're trying to do is have as much of it as possible. So I think that what you need to do is actually just be present and be aware and be open-minded, be curious, always be open to opportunities, always be open to experiences. And I think something that's really important and something that this journey really taught me is you never know what the future is going to look like. And so you don't know what's going to be useful or what's going to end up being the stuff that really helps you. And so just be open to it all. I really get upset when people say, oh, well, why will I learn this? It will never be useful. There were a few years ago, I got very mad when I saw that a lot of public schools were saying, we're not going to teach fiction in schools anymore. We're going to teach only nonfiction because fiction is useless. It just blew my brain. I thought, what are you talking about? fiction is soul food. It makes people good. It helps us be full human beings. It helps with so many things. But this horrible mindset of what's going to be useful versus, oh, this is totally useless. I think that's the opposite of what this person called a lucky mindset. I just think you need to be constantly curious, constantly open-minded, and constantly open to all possibilities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So we're getting near the end point. I'm hoping maybe another question or two will come in. But you know, I really wanted to ask you about your selection of phrasing for your subtitle, where you say, "How I learned to pay attention, master myself, and win." Tell us about that. What do you mean pay attention and master myself?
Well, the first I think we've talked about a lot. It's being present. And I think the reason why I made sure that was first was, in a sense, it's the most important, and it underlines everything else. If you aren't paying attention, if you aren't present, you're not going to be able to master yourself. Self-mastery can only come if you're self-aware, if you understand what's going on in you. Now, it was really interesting that this book has this subtitle, because when I was in grad school, I studied with Walter Mischel, who is known for the marshmallow studies. So the kids who wait for that second marshmallow end up doing much better in life than the kids who can't wait and eat the marshmallow right away. It's called delay of gratification. And so I'd worked with the source of self-control. And so theoretically, I should have had all the tools of self-mastery, right? Self-control, knowing yourself. But it turns out that studying it theoretically is very different from being able to recognize these things in yourself and figure out how to control them. Poker taught that to me, because one of the reasons that poker is such a good teaching tool and such a good learning tool is that you actually have immediate feedback, and that feedback has money attached to it. So you actually see your lack of self-control on the bottom line. You make a bad decision and all of a sudden you lose, and there goes your money. You make a good decision and you're rewarded. You get to stay in the game and potentially, and that's so powerful. It's actually a really good teaching mechanism.
That's great.
And so I think it enabled me to pay attention to my emotions, to pay attention to my thoughts, to pay attention to what was going on with me, so that I could then master it and figure out tools. How do I keep that from preventing my decision process from deteriorating? How do I keep that process clean? How do I take that emotion out of the process, out of the equation?
So along those lines of gratification, when you're not paying attention, you lose money. One of a member of the audience says, "Do you ever feel like taking a shot at the high rollers table?" I guess that means the really big ticket games.
No.
What's the answer?
I value my bankroll. And one of the things, so I didn't know what a bankroll was. Bankroll is kind of your budget, the amount of money that you have to spend. And Erik taught me that you can not play above your bankroll. That in poker, as in life, you really need to pay attention to what you can afford to lose. And sure, sometimes you can take shots. And what taking a shot means is playing slightly higher than you're used to, because that way you test yourself. You see, am I ready to make that move? But for me, I mean, normally the highest buy-in tournament that I play is still very expensive for me. It's a $10,000 tournament. And when I play that, I sell a lot of my action, which means that I don't actually put in $10,000. I ask a lot of people, hey, do you want 10%? Do you want 20%? Do you want this? Do you want that? So that's a way of mitigating risk and evening out variance. From 10 to 25 to 50, Erik plays tournaments that are $100,000 buy-ins, that are $1 million buy-ins. To me, I look at that and I say no, because the other thing that you have to do, and I asked Erik once, how do you do it? How do you play knowing that you just spend $1 million to enter this? And he said, you can't think that way. You have to just play. They're just chips, and you have to just play without caring. I could never play stakes that high, just given where I am in my life, and not care. It's just impossible. And knowing that, this is self-mastery, right? That's that second part. I know that about myself, so I should not play that. Maybe one day I will get to the point where, well, never $1 million tournament, but when I feel like I can take a shot at a high roller. But until that day comes, I think it would be just setting that money on fire, because I know I'm not going to make the best decisions.
All right, so maybe this is the final question for the audience. And it's a good question. I mean, this is somebody who obviously knows your work and is asking you, do you think Sherlock Holmes would have been a good poker player?
I think Sherlock Holmes would have been an amazing poker player, because talk about, I mean, the whole approach that Sherlock Holmes espouses is mindful observation. He would have picked up on everything about all of the players and known how to get to them, because that's how he often gets to his criminals. He knows how to get under their skin, and he would know how to adjust to them. And he's someone who's definitely incredibly aware of what's going on. And so I think that Holmes would have been wonderful. He's also very good at self-mastery. He is very good at identifying emotions and taking them out of his decision process. So I think, yes, he would have been wonderful. And you know who would have been wonderful and potentially better than Holmes is Professor Moriarty. Sometimes it pays to be the evil genius.
Sometimes it pays to be evil, yes. Good. So then in the end, I mean, I wanted to ask you in closing is you know, how has this experience influenced your life going forward? I mean, how have you changed? How are you thinking differently about the world, about your life there in Brooklyn and so forth?
Well, I mean, I think we've talked about some of these things, but I do think it's made me much better able to let go. I mean, I'm a very type A personality. You know, I'm someone who likes to kind of have things planned to a certain extent. I'm also someone who's supremely disorganized. So take those things for what you will. But I think poker has really taught me to just let go of the outcome. That's so hard. It's so hard to deal with uncertainty and to realize that you can never gather all the information, that there's just going to be too much unknown and you have to just let go of it. That's something that I knew intellectually, but that I think poker has really helped me internalize. And on a more practical level, there's a line in the book, which I think is true. At some point, my husband was looking at me very thoughtfully, and I said, what's going on? And he said, you know, you take a lot less shit from people than you used to. And
that's what I was getting at. I remember that.
And I think that that's something that poker has given to me. I think it's made me much less likely to take shit from people than I was in the past.
Yeah. Well, all right, good. Amen. All right, lovely talking to you, Maria. Next time, hopefully, cocktails for real.
Absolutely. This was wonderful. Yeah, cheers to I only have a water bottle, but cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for taking the time to do this with us tonight. It's been really wonderful. For everyone who's watching, there's a link to The Biggest Bluff, so you can get your own copy and read it because it's very good. You can get that just in the comments there. Yeah, and thank you again both so much.
Thank
And
you.
I also wanted to say two thank yous. One, thank you to the Strand. Support your independent bookstores and support the Strand. But really thank you to Erik Larson, who is one of my favorite people and one of my idols and inspirations, one of the best nonfiction writers, or writers, period, of fiction or nonfiction, that I've ever read. And so, yes, please do buy my book, but also if you haven't read his books, please buy his, including his latest, The Splendid and the Vile, which is just absolutely incredible. So thank you, Erik.
Well, thank you, Maria. That was very sweet of you. Thank you for being such an easy person to interview. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good night.
All right.